fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Got Mr. Joe Goldberg back in the saddle again.
Back in the saddle. Not in the saddle. Could have been in the saddle in Tennessee. The son is married. Oh. Minister Goldberg came through. A great time.
Well,
for family. Everybody was there. Everybody was a very rare moment when most, if not all, the families in the same spots. That always makes it special too.
Yeah.
A time for introspection, kind of like Eric's books, which are based on the idea of introspection. Introspection, right? That's my segue.
That's your segue. Good job, boy.
How'd I do, Eric? Did I segue well in the introspection part of your book?
I think it's perfect.
Thank you. I think my check is in the mail. I think back in the saddle. I am back in the saddle.
See that? Now you can keep on working. You got permission. Anyway, who is back in the saddle? Well, we've got a writer, and he's actually been a multi-award-winning author already with his newest book, and a filmmaker. Let's welcome him, because we're going to talk about his latest book, and it's Eric Magun. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me.
So let's talk. So your new book, the latest book, Thank God for the Sinners. It's a Rick Price novel. Where did that come from for you? Because is this your first novel ever?
This is the first, this is my debut novel, and I decided to write it around this main character, Rick Price. In this particular book, a lot of it takes place in China, and then it kind of backdrops into his life and throughout New York. And then we're going to make this into a series of Rick Price books. Already working on the second one called Thank God for the Drugs, and this one will take Rick out of China and we'll bring him across country in the United States. So every book will be a kind of a new adventure with this very complex anti-hero as he goes through his different challenges.
So this Rick Price, you've kind of already created the character and you're creating the scenarios with each book, or did you have kind of the ideas for each book and you created the character that you put into it? Like, how did that start? Yeah, no,
it's a great question. I mean, I have lived in and worked long periods of time overseas in China back in the early 2000s, mid 1990s, early 2000s, and then throughout my working career in international business in Southeast Asia as well. And so, I've done two things. I've accumulated a lot of anecdotes and a lot of stories and a lot of experiences and a lot of things I've seen and heard, and kind of wrote those all down throughout my years, kind of chronicling them, and, kind of shaping up what this is going to look like, because I really wanted to expose a lot of this kind of early open door policy between the U.S. and China, and the business that was going on in the trade, and more importantly, the people like myself that went over there, went right when it was about opening, and when it certainly not the China that it is today. So there's a very special time period that happened during this book that will just never happen again, because China has, achieved things leaps and bounds than where it was when I first was visiting. So I put all together, amalgamated all these stories, and then I wanted to create a character that was very complex, who was overseas a lot, under this guise of being an international businessman. I wanted to up the ante a bit and say that, he's overseas so much that, he's attracted the attention of the CIA and becomes an asset for them because of all the time that he spends overseas and with the people that he spends time with. And then I really wanted to kind of, show that, he's not your average ordinary hero. He's a complex person. He's gone through a lot of trauma in his life. And so he's a bit mentally unstable as well. So you have this mentally unstable character living this, secret life in China as an operative and as a businessman. He's got a family back home, and he just gets into, a world of trouble. And, the whole thing was on this character is I really wanted to give everybody an understanding of, I really wanted to do a deep dive into this character's life, really from his birth all the way on up to the current time in the story itself, so that will flash back and forth, and the reader will have a really good understanding about this character, why he's so complex, and more importantly, why he makes some of the decisions that he does.
So, Eric, let me ask you then. You collected stories over the 25 years of your life in China and other places. And so you tell them stories, and you created Rick Price, the character, and you just explained sort of your background, how you got these stories, but there's a difference between stories and self. So how much of self is Rick Price versus just a collection of the stories that you lived?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're about, I would say, good 50%. I tried to give him a lot of background. I had a pretty incredible life growing up, and I wanted to incorporate some of that as well. So there's some definite ties between both of us. There's tons of time where I took dramatic liberties to make it even more interesting.
Well, what about the music part?
Yeah,
you love music, right? That's your thing.
It's one of my
amongst films, and writing. I got that.
Yeah. No, music's been a big part of my life. I grew up, in the 70s and 80s in New York City. We just fell in love with the whole punk rock movement while it was going on. It was a pretty big movement in New York. It really sort of encapsulated my teenage and my early, adulthood, into the music, into the scene, into sort of, what was going on, the sort of revolution that was happening in the city, and all the great bands and just the really creative, talented people that came out of that movement. That's, still pretty prevalent today, although the music has changed a bit. This whole idea of, going out and saying how you feel and doing what you want to do and being free to express your opinions. It just always resonated with me and in my writing as well. And so I wanted to give this character, Rick, a very similar background so that you kind of really understood that, he had a turbulent childhood, but the music itself, it just kind of runs parallel with the story. I even went so far as to each chapter in the book is kind of an ode to a real punk rock classic song, and each song title's got something to do loosely with that chapter. So I wanted to give the reader an experience of, look, here's a book to read. I created all the 45 chapters into a playlist, put it on Spotify, so you can actually read the book. You can play along with some of the book, and understand, maybe a little bit more about the characters and a little bit more about, some of the themes that go into each chapter.
So Rick Price, who is he, and how do you experience that character? Are you the type of writer that you can actually hear him, see him, feel him, and talk to him and all that, or what's your experience in writing this character?
Yeah, I wanted to tell the story through the character's eyes. So you really get a really good sense of, who he is, the situations that he's in, what he's seeing, what he's smelling, what he's tasting. And I also then dipped into literally from his childbirth on, we kind of go back and forth. So as he's growing up and the story is starting to grow up in itself, you really sort of understand, how complex this guy is and why he's, can make some of the decisions that he does, how he deals with the stress and pressure of his life and his job. I put him in kind of an incredible situation in the beginning of the book that's, he's basically has to defend his life and his innocence, and he's got this huge background of trauma to deal with as well, as, sort of just the normal pressure of being this operative and having to do business with some very shady people, overseas, where you can make one wrong move and get into a lot of trouble, and, be in a country like China that just doesn't have any justice, and then sort of how do you deal with all of that and so far away from home? And all alone. Like how does that all work with this complex character?
Well, Eric, I was asked another question. I'm going to go with this one because you've mentioned it several times. Trauma, mental illness. Is that the theme of the book that's behind the stories?
It very much is. I wanted to pose a question. I gave this character, a life that is a little bit, more exaggerated than we all would have. But we all have, trauma in our lives. We've all suffered something that just stays with us for a very long period of time. And I wanted to kind of give this character a lot of situations that he has to constantly deal with. And then, more importantly, I wanted to give him a real complex childbirth into this world and, kind of pose this question of, how much did his, horrendous childbirth, add to some of the problems that he had in life, or did the problems in his life just manifest itself, through just bad experiences, or is there a combination of both things? How do you determine, the decisions we make, and where that all comes from? So I wanted to kind of pose this real big question. If you're damaged at birth, how does it stay with you? If you experience damage throughout your life, how does that stay with you? How do you reconcile maybe potentially both those things at once?
Writing a book like this and a character as compared to when you direct, what was the biggest challenge for you doing the different task?
I think, for me, the big challenge in this, this narrative of writing is, really getting into the character's head and then having the voice of that character be the voice throughout the entire book. Whereas, a lot of times, film directing, there's multiple characters and we're creating, these incredible scenes and shots and, ways of camera angles and ways of working it into sort of a visual story, as well as, not just the narrative, where this is kind of, the visual elements of what's going on is all going to happen within the writing itself. So there's nothing really seen there. So how do I develop a character that you don't see, that I know mentally you're going to get an image of? How do I put them in situations across the world that, people have never really experienced before, and make it feel as if they're right there along there with him, and not having the ability to, use film as a medium to sort of show that or express that, has been sort of the biggest difference between writing this novel and then putting out onto film, sort of these big story ideas.
Well, if movies, which they do, have lots of other characters you just mentioned, how did you do the other characters, the secondary characters, for lack of a better phrase, in this book? How do we learn about them? Do you know them? Are they friends of yours?
Yeah, you learn about them through Rick's journey. So there'll be people that Rick has, from his parents to his friends, to his coworkers, to his, people in government that are, sort of his caretakers, and then sort of, the actual business that he does overseas. So you'll get introduced to everybody through the eyes of Rick.
The bad guy or the bad people, the evil, let's say, in the book itself, do you prep yourself some way to write that character or those characters and the things that they do?
Very much so. There's very much that process of, we're going to introduce a new character here. Let's totally make sure that I have that character completely, like any other author, flushed out. So you get his or her idiosyncrasies, their age. I kind of go through this whole litany of, what really is this person, and I kind of put that whole narrative and that visual together, and separate each one of those, so that, I can talk with conviction about each one of them, can kind of understand a little bit further about what drives them, and what has driven them. And, and then, the other side to it is, a lot of the characters also that I'm expressing in this book are characters that aren't even, Americans themselves. And so I have to really kind of put myself into the body and the mind of maybe somebody who's, been living their entire life in Hong Kong or, in southern China or different parts of the world, and have them come across with their own idiosyncrasies, the way that they would appear to be sort of normalized if you were to see them like in the street or something like that.
Well, perfect. So if you have people from non-U.S., the question would be, how much is the location a character in the book, or the various locations characters in your book? Because you've mentioned it several times that it's not here, it's someplace else. Is the location a character in the book?
It's the location a character
right.
in the book. Absolutely. 100%. And I do take you to lots of places that I know people have never been to before, understood about, wanted to understand about, knew about. So yeah, there's very unique places and very unique situations that happen that really take on a life of their own. So I got to be just as careful with kind of telling that location story as I would of telling a character story.
Is there a lot of violence in the book? Is there a lot of action?
There's definitely a lot of violence in the book. The character is prone to it. He's lived with it. It has become a release with him at some point. It's become a go-to for him at some point. And then there's also parts of the book that are violent that is abhorrent to the character. That he's just sort of like, no, this isn't right. And so he's kind of torn. But yes, there is a definite, it's a definite dark and gritty story.
And are you thinking of your audience as you write this? Are they over your shoulder and that you considering how they're going to react to the violence, or do you just not worry about that?
No, I do worry about it. And I do think about it. And look, part of the thing is I want to write a story that's, super compelling with a compelling character that, isn't your ordinary hero. And so I wanted to, also kind of pull back the curtain on some of the things that I've seen and that I've witnessed overseas that are, either violent in nature or just not the kind of things that we would experience back here in the States, and put them out there in a way that, that I'm always thinking about the people reading it. But at the same time, I'm really testing about, how far can I go with this before I turn people off? Because I don't want to do that. But at the same time, I don't want to create a simple story that's clean and neat, either. So there's that kind of paradox of, how far can you go with the violence or some of the abuse, keep the readers engaged and interested, knowing that your own character himself is flawed, without sort of, turning everybody away.
Right. Yeah. You got to keep them believable. You got to keep the story real so that it just happens that way. Have you ever known a person in your real life that you've used in your books? And if so, have you killed someone off that you?
Yeah, I was waiting for that question. He loves killing off people's friends.
Yeah, like just and give us a name. We'll call them.
The true crime guy comes in. I'm going to kill your friend.
Well, yeah, I don't want to convict myself here, but no. I would say just about every character that I created in the book, it does resemble somebody that I've known or I've heard about or I experienced and just sort of took the trait from this person or something from somebody else. But I tried to keep it, as real as possible. And I think by, any writer, by using sort of these real live characters or people, just helps you build that suspense and that whole narrative about who they are and what they are and how they affect this certain character. So the answer to the question is yes, I definitely used, influence from a lot of people that I've come to know.
Eric, you're film for years, but you're a new author. Have you felt the difference between the two different kind of creative arts?
Absolutely. Look, it's with a film, as everybody kind of understands, it's a super collaborative issue, right? You got a super, team of people and actors and so many people to rely on to kind of get the job done and get the story across and get the scene shot. So a lot of moving parts, a lot of people in the mix, but a lot of things around where writing, as we all know, is just this sole, one person sitting down by yourself, creating this incredible universe, but doing it all on your own. So there's definitely, that's been a huge difference. You just can't rely on somebody to do something else. You're writing the story.
But what's the same?
I think the same is it's like it's with any story, whether it's on film or a book. You have a situation and a story that you want to be able to tell, and you want the audience itself to understand it, but then also enjoy where you're bringing them and what you're showing them. And so there's that common goal of I want to put out a product that is going to successfully, tell the story, and keep the audience engaged.
So in writing this, it sounds like a lot of the stories, of course, most of them come from a very personal time in your life and stories that are real to you. And so when you develop them and put them into a book, and you're going to do it into a series now, do you find that this process has changed you in some way differently than what making movies do?
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot more intimate, and so I feel like, you just have that amazing time period where it's just you, and whatever you're putting onto the keyboard. Now, I've written screenplays too, so it's not that dissimilar. The writing style is a little bit different, but the idea of, this is all coming out of your head and onto paper, and you have, sort of this idea of where you're going with it, and you just have to now make sure that, that it's all being portrayed in a manner that's understandable, and that there's a cohesive consistency to it. There's something very liberating about writing and doing a novel, and not having to worry about anybody else or what's going on with teams of people, and and shot schedules and things that have to happen in a certain period of time. I mean, for writers, we can write when the time suits us. We can write at any point of the day. There is no schedule except for the schedule that you make for yourself. And so that's for me, I found that to be very liberating.
I find with the title that you give it, Thank God for the Sinners, that it kind of alludes to a little bit of humor.
Yes.
Throughout the book. And so with that, as another thing, do you have to be careful on how you write the humor into a book when you've got violence going on? What's the trick to that so we can copy and do it?
Yeah, steal it.
I don't know if there's a particular trick, except that, what I think is, the main character himself, he's got kind of this snide, sarcastic reality or undertone to the things that he witnesses and how he reacts to them. And I think the sarcasm, whether it could be dark or not, it just sort of lends itself to some pretty humorous moments at time. And then there's some experiences that he experiences that are just, completely outlandish and wild, and will make you laugh, because it's either that or you're going to cry, but you'll probably just laugh because they can be humorous at times as well. So there's it's definitely hard to mix, sort of the violence and sort of the mental, darkness, and then say, well, now there's these periods of sarcasm or light, added to this. So yeah, it's a hard juxtaposition to do, because the character himself isn't, any kind of a comedian. But I think he finds aspects of life to be dark and humorous at the same time.
Well, let me ask then on the character, since we're back to that, is you went in with Rick Price, the character that you knew. How was he at the end? Was he the same guy? Did he change? And how much would you learn about him along the way?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing about the book, and it's a hard thing that I had to really struggle with, because the normal, I use cliche for lack of a better word, or antidote to these kinds of hero stories is that you have a character, he goes through something, he makes decisions, and at the end of the day, he's a changed man, and usually he's changed for the better. That sort of cliche in a way, or the way that things are normally done. Yeah, I didn't want to necessarily go there too much. The character definitely gets through experiences, but at the end of the day, he still is who he is. And he still keeps all the skeletons in his closet are still going to be there. So he does mature and grow up a bit, and get out of a situation that was incredibly, serious for him at that moment, but doesn't necessarily come across as a completely changed person. So, you're kind of understanding that, these things are really deep seated within this character.
Now, this series, have you got it kind of planned out now? Is it all mapped out? Are you the guy that's got it all outlined, and where you're going to go and how many books you're going to do? Or is this you're just going playing it as it comes?
No, I mean, there's definitely some planning to it. I have I'm already almost halfway done with the second one, so that one is pretty much got a, full on, outlines of, where we're going and, kind of ticking off the different chapters as we get through them. The one after that one, I have loosely based, and I know where I'm going to base it and loosely what's going to go on. As far as the way that I want this whole series to end, I also have a real general idea of how that's going to look like. But not everything is completely flushed out. But I do know the beginning, the middle, and hopefully where I'm going to end this.
Have you set up a website, social media? Do you kind of do all that stuff? Do you like readers to follow you in a particular place?
Yeah.
Okay. And where would you like them to go?
They can go to my website. It's my first and last name, ericmagun.com. And they can, find everything that's going on with the book. You can find out places to order it online there as well. You can see, the actual trailer and one of my films that I made. So there's a lot of links to it, and there's a lot of great anecdotes that going on with the character Rick and some reviews. Real nice, compelling website. So definitely check that out. And then I'll have updates about the second book on there as well. Of course, the way that the world is today, I'm pretty active in in the social media aspect. So we're posting 2 or 3 times a week about some of the things that I've been doing and have done, including interviews like these, and trying to get the reader not only acclimated with the book and the character, but with myself as well as a writer and as a filmmaker and as a person living here on this earth trying to do some good work. So we're active on all the social medias, and the book can be found on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. But, certainly my website is a good resource.
Great. We'll put all that up on our website as well so people can find it easily. You doing TikTok? Are you doing dancing on TikTok and all that too?
Not doing TikTok.
Come on. China. You're a China guy. You got to support the home team.
Get on there and bring a dog and dance around.
Yeah, you know what?
Talk.
If it sells books, who knows?
You'd be surprised. My dog gets more activity than I do. So there you go.
Great.
Well, the book.
That too.
Well, yeah, that's a whole other show. Thank God for the Sinners. It's a Rick Price novel, and the guest is the writer of this and many other things. You should check him out, Eric Magun. So thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you, guys. I appreciate the time.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.